Interested.
So today, for this session, I'm going to be talking about Moxibustion. Moxibustion is burning of mugwort for therapeutic purposes, and it's used for a really wide variety of purposes. And this is kind of the raw, plain moxa stick. So give a little bit of background and history and stuff about this type of treatment. Like cupping, Moxibustion has become popular in recent times from Chinese medicine, from the resurgence of traditional Chinese medicine, and it's in traditional Chinese medicine is much more widely used than it is in American Chinese medicine, I think. It's kind of time consuming, so it's used less. I think that TCM practitioners in the US often don't emphasize it as much because it's not as profitable as far as the amount of time you put in versus the amount of money that you get. Plus, it also has a smoky smell that can be objectionable to people that you're working around if you're in a setting like this one. So, hello. So, I use a couple of different kinds of moxa. This kind I don't use much indoors because it's very smoky, but this is the most traditional kind. This is the kind that I usually use here in the clinic. It is basically charcoal made out of mugwort. It's been baked to the point of being blackened, and so most of the smoke has already been smoked out of it. It makes a little bit of smoke, but not a whole lot. Here for this demonstration, I'll be doing some stuff with both of them. There's also a smaller, less smoky, we call them green moxa sticks. They say smokeless on the box, but they're not smokeless. They're that are made out of a more refined type of mugwort. It's actually been fermented, and it's not as smoky, but it's still but it's not baked to the point of being charcoal either. The charcoal ones still smell like mugwort somewhat when they're burning. There's just a lot less of it. So when using moxa, the heat does some of what is being done by it, and the smoke and the oils probably do some of it as well. So, but the heat is a big part of it. And some of what it is doing when you heat an area of the body up is that it's acting sort of the way that inflammation would act. And it's often getting the body to produce substances called leukotrienes that sort of activate the healing process or initialize the healing process. So it can be really good for wounds that have not healed for a long time, or wounds that maybe wouldn't heal on their own. Like injuries to cartilage, for example, will often just not heal left to their own devices. So they'll stay injured. And then in some cases with moxa, it's possible to provoke them to heal. I've used it for a torn meniscus in someone's knee on a few occasions, and then later had them verified by diagnostic imaging as well as by movement of the meniscus that it was not seeming to be torn anymore. So it's and that's something that usually wouldn't heal on its own. With broken bones, they tend to speed the process up some. And in people who have broken bones that aren't healing, they also sometimes will get that to happen. So in older folks, sometimes if they break a bone, it doesn't, really try to mend at all. But sometimes it does, and moxa seems to be able to shift that more towards the sometimes it does side of the equation.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's pretty neat. So it's kind of like making the body respond to an old injury or an injury that is not being prioritized as though it were a new injury. And that's helpful. Sometimes after moxibustion, people might feel more sore in an area or more sensitive in an area right after, but they usually feel better later, especially if it's something like a harder tissue type of injury, like bone or cartilage. If it's muscular, usually the heat is relaxing and pain relieving, and people will feel better from that quickly. Both the warming process and the smoke from the moxa can make people feel sleepy. So sometimes, you have to be careful with that people know to expect that and are prepared for that. And sometimes it's really helpful for calming people and getting them to sleep too, if they are very consistently unable to and other measures aren't working.
When you're talking about like treating a broken bone or cartilage or something like that, do you just concentrate your smoke and the moxa just to that area? Are there like certain points that you use? For the most part, if I'm working on an injury, I do the moxa over the injury site. Sometimes I do it if the injury site is something I can't get to. Sometimes I do it a little further out from the injury site so that they're feeling it past the injury site. So like if somebody's leg was in a cast, but their foot was exposed and you did it on the ball of their foot, that would help circulation getting to that distal point, and it's going to have to pass through everything to get there. So circulation is part of it. Working on the inflammatory process and kind of like basically provoking or mimicking a little bit of inflammation is part of what it does. And we don't know all of what it does. It's magic. It's magic. It's somewhat mysterious. So the name moxa comes from the Japanese word for the stuff, which is moxa. It has a U in the middle of it, but it's not very pronounced, like MOKUSA. But in Chinese, it's called Ju. And how do you spell that? Chinese letter, like JIU with a upside down circumflex above it. Perfect. But yeah. So, and then the bustion part of it is from like combustion, the Latin word. So it's kind of a weird mixture of Japanese and Latin root words, which is not a very common combination. But this it's an East Asian practice. Koreans also claim to have invented it. I don't know what their name is for it though, but it's existed in all of those cultures in Japan and Korea and China for a very long time, since basically as far back as there are any kind of records about that sort of thing. And there are similar practices in other places. With Middle Eastern medicine, they have it's called sheh in Arabic, and the herb is, and it's also burned for various different medicinal purposes. Often, the smoke being what they were going for, using it for smudging, kind of clearing the air or driving off evil spirits and things like that. It's used also other artemisias. This artemisia is pretty much native to Eurasia. I think it's everywhere now. It has been everywhere for my whole life, but I think it's just native to Eurasia. But a lot of other ones live here in North America and are also bound up in little sticks and burned for various therapeutic practices. So on the Fort Berthold Reservation, where I used to live, it was they used three-leaved artemisia, sage, which is like a prairie sage, for for smudging, and also for warming up injured muscles and things like that. I'm not sure what all it was used for, but definitely injured muscles, and just for smudging, for like cleansing an indoor space. And in Hidatsa, it's called ikogadagi, which means something like fox medicine or fox herb, something like that, something to do with foxes, because they live in the bushes. They like build their nests. This bush forms big clumps, and so they build their nests in among the brush, and it protects them. It can protect people too. So very, very similar practices used with different artemisias in different places. In the Mediterranean, the name Artemisia links it to the goddess Artemis, and Artemis is related to the hunt and to dreams and things like that, the moon. So people would burn the Artemisia, burn mugwort in that area for therapeutic purposes also. And sometimes old writers talk about fumigation, which is just basically like smudging, using smoke for therapeutic purposes. And they almost never say what they were using to make that smoke. But, this is would at least fit into that category. I'm not sure whether the people writing in Latin in medieval Europe and in classical antiquity in the Mediterranean, which herbs they were using, but they also were using smoke for therapeutic purposes. So, like with cupping, I learned about this initially when I was in Central Asia. So my background on it is from Uyghur people who were, their medicine is a mixture of, they're on the Silk Road, so their medicine is a mixture of Chinese medicine and Persian medicine, and then Persian medicine is like a mixture of local traditions and Mediterranean Greek stuff as well. So this they probably got from the Chinese side of things rather than the Western side of things, but there are different ways of doing moxa, and the way that I practice it is only indirect. Some people put moxa directly on the skin, or they anchor it to the skin with a needle, put an acupuncture needle in the skin and put a little ball of moxa on the end of the acupuncture needle. I don't do any of that. I just hold it near the skin. And I always tell people, it doesn't have to be painful to work. Just let's hold it here until it gets to be too warm, and then we'll go on to the next spot. So for me, the idea is never to raise a blister or anything like that. Partly because there would potentially be more grounds for liability issues, and then also partly just because the people that I learned the practice from didn't do that at all either. So yeah. In the same saying of the Prophet Muhammad, where he's talking about cupping being healing, he explicitly forbids branding the skin for medicinal purposes, burning the skin for medicinal purposes. So
it does seem counterintuitive.
Yeah, I mean, people do it, and the various different forms of burning the skin for various different reasons. I've been part of a lot of medical traditions, and I mean, cauterizing something is still kind of like that too. But people would burn unbroken skin, otherwise unbroken skin, for various different reasons. And I mean, it does kind of provide a shock to the body or whatever, but it also makes a burn, and when there's a burn, there's potential for infection and all sorts of things like that. And I, as a practitioner of an unlicensed profession working in a very litigious society, I try to avoid giving anybody any reason to sue me.
Yeah.
I just
Very
know,
wise.
that don't really want to do anything like that. So, but you know, occasionally people might get burned. So I do keep some burn remedy around while I'm doing moxa, just in case, you know, somebody accidentally gets burned. A lot of the time, what I will do to try and keep that from happening is if I'm holding the moxa stick near their skin, I'll actually put my finger out past it and make it so that my finger is touching their skin with the same hand that's holding the moxa stick. That way, if they jerk, they're not going to jerk into it if they twitch or turn or whatever. Because, you know, one thing I've noticed about people is that if you tell them to sit still, they don't remember that for more than a few seconds. You know, most people have got about a 10-second limit on being, okay, like sit still while I do this procedure. They will, but then they'll remember something they want to tell you and they'll start moving around as they're telling the story or something like that. You know, it's very hard to get, it can't be counted on that anyone is going to sit still. So it's important to like take this measure to make sure that, that if they move towards you, then they're not going to collide with the burning thing. So the other, so something else to be aware of in terms of not burning people is that how much heat people can feel with different parts of their body is variable, and also under different circumstances, the same amount of heat can feel very different to the same part of the body. So the hands and feet typically are very temperature sensitive, whereas the knees, not so much. You know, we don't touch things with our knees to see if they're hot, but with our fingers, you know, fingers are really good for that. Our feet are pretty good at it too. You know, people's mouths are really good at it as well. You know, so if you're doing it on somebody's knee, the tissue might actually soak up quite a lot of heat before it starts to feel hot to them. Also, if somebody has a loss of feeling in their feet, that can be a really good reason to do moxa because it's a circulation issue, and you can get more circulation happening with the moxa, but you have to be careful not to burn them, because if they have no circulation, they might not feel the burn happening. And if a burn does happen, it's much more likely to become a complicated, infected thing because their body isn't going to be any good at healing those issues. So I do a lot of moxa on people with neuropathy in their feet, and also in their hands and other places as well, but especially feet is where you usually see it. And usually in that case, I will hold the moxa to the point that I'm working on for about 10 seconds or so, and then I'll move the moxa away and touch the point and see if it feels hot to the touch. And once it gets pretty hot to the touch, I move on to the next one, even if they're not feeling it yet. And usually, if you do something like that once or twice a week, the amount of heat that it takes before they start feeling it often changes pretty quickly. So it might be that, you know, at the beginning, they just don't feel it at all. And that's not unusual, that they just will not feel the heat at all. Even though they can feel the ground with their feet, they're just not, you know, that sensitive to temperature. And then a week later, they might start feeling the heat, you know, or the second session or the third session, they might start feeling the heat and being able to notice it. And that's a really clear sign that what you're doing is helping to return some feeling to the area of the body and helping to bring circulation to the area as well. Perhaps somewhat strangely, just soaking your feet in hot water doesn't seem to have quite the same effect. It helps with circulation, but it's a little bit of a different it doesn't seem to have the same kind of lasting building effect that moxa tends to have, where it gets better and better as you go along. It tends to help for the moment, for a few hours or whatever, but not in a way that builds on itself and continues to improve over time. So it's different than just heat. Part of it is probably that it is focused on specific places. Part of it is probably that it's a hotter temperature being reached than what you would be able to tolerate with just your feet in water. And some of it is probably something else that I don't completely understand, that has not been fully elucidated as far as mechanism of action goes.
Would you be able, for people who've like lost feeling or have lack of circulation when you're doing this, could you also use it in combination with something like cayenne oil or cayenne salve when they go home?
Absolutely.
And then have a treatment with you and then kind of do that as an alternation to sort of
help? So that the question is it possible to use this in combination with something like cayenne salve that would help with circulation? And the answer is yes, definitely. Often if somebody has a circulatory issue, I'll be doing the moxa and giving them something to help with circulation internally and putting something on topically as well, if I can get them to do all that. Because the thing about losing feeling in your feet is that it by itself might not be that big of a deal, but it can actually be a very short step away from some really bad outcomes, like getting gangrene and having to have an amputation, which is not at all a rare, incident. When I talk to people about this, sometimes they feel like, gangrene's something that used to happen back in the Civil War. So it happens to people all the time. People with especially diabetic neuropathy, things like that. Amputations are very not rare at all. So keeping it from getting to that level and also preventing falls, which can be a very bad outcome that can result from not being able to feel your feet. Eventually people get to the point where they're just not steady on their feet because they can't feel them. So, preventing either or both of those outcomes is really important. So I try really hard, if somebody's feet are numb, to not let it go any further in that direction.
Do you use internally, like ginger or something like that?
Yeah, something like ginger. Garlic is really good. Cayenne is harder for people to tolerate, but it is helpful. But yeah, all kinds of spicy types of things. And then also stuff that works on the kidneys, because often the kidneys are at issue as well in that sort of situation. Sometimes someone's kidneys will start to lose some function. They'll start retaining water, and that will interfere with their circulation, and that will lead to the loss of feeling. So there are those things, and loss of circulation and everything. So that's all very closely tied together, especially in people who are having high blood sugar, which is resulting in sugar being spilled through the kidneys, which leads to all that other stuff.
Downward spiral.
Rachel says she really likes homeopathic arnica for this. Is that an internal arnica or a topical arnica?
I like both. If they'll do it together, but like a 30C of homeopathic arnica just by itself, 3 times a day for 5 days, just by itself can do a lot.
That's interesting. I haven't tried that.
I wonder if you could do arnica in like a fusion form.
It's kind of poisonous. Yeah.
The root is not poisonous. It's
the root is not poisonous. The leaves are poisonous.
It's usually the above ground parts. I don't know all the species though.
Yeah.
So when you say arnica, you're talking like a homeopathic tablet of some sort?
Yeah, homeopathic tablets and also topically, which is, you said 30C. Is that the, I think that's the concept.
Love it. Love arnica. My friends at work used to call me the arnica ambassador.
That's great.
I have a friend who just had surgery, and her surgeon actually gave her, like, it's like a Highlands
Mm-hmm.
bottle of arnica to take internally so she didn't bruise, and
Yeah.
he has not the first bruise. So,
That's great.
yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So, time. All right. So this, so that's using it for circulation and making sure that you don't burn people. There are different points on the body that are good for different things. In traditional Chinese medicine, there's a whole system of meridians and points on those meridians that are used for different things. When I learned about it, I didn't really learn specifically about those things. I learned about particular points and patterns of points that were used for particular issues, as well as just kind of the general practice of using it on injuries and stuff. And the group of people I was working with at the time, we were seeing a lot of injuries. We were in Kazakhstan, and there was both, let's see, there was, so these people were Uyghurs, they were from Western China, and people in their community there were engaged in a struggle to get more autonomy or independence from China. And so we were working with some people who were kind of on the run from that conflict or laying low from that conflict, who would maybe, like in one case, we treated a guy who was a politician, and the police came to his house and beat him up really bad. Chinese Communist Party police came to his house, and, you know, they didn't arrest him or anything. They just beat him up and left him there. And so he left town because he figured that they would probably come back later and do something else or whatever. So he came to Almaty, and he was, you know, just kind of covered in bruises, probably had some small fractures, but we didn't have any way to assess that. So, you know, we were treating that sort of thing. And at the same time, we were also treating refugees from the civil war in Tajikistan, which was going on just a few miles away, maybe a couple days walk away, several miles, but we were the next town from where they were. If you went north, it was just, it's a very, Tajikistan, and especially some parts of it are just, it's incredibly mountainous and rugged and very remote. And you know, we worked with people who had never been outside of the valley that they lived in until they had to flee from war coming and things like that. So we got to see a lot of injuries that you wouldn't typically see in practice over here. Most of them were not things that had just happened. Most of them were things that had happened a couple days ago, but things like broken bones and crush injuries and stuff like that. So we were working on a lot of injuries, and we were working on a lot of, you know, physical trauma, and, you know, sometimes cuts and things like that as well. So we did a lot with Mox on all of those things, and then also on different areas for different organs and different presentations. So I wanted to talk a little bit about doing it for those kinds of things, because with the injuries, you know, you just kind of do it where the injury is. Usually we would do it along with some other stuff for the injury, like putting a wet poultice that was soaked with some kind of medicinal herb like yarrow over a bruised area, and then heating that wet foment, the wet pad that had the herb soaked into it, with the mox as a way of driving the substances from the medicine into the tissue.
really probably literally it's maybe more like getting the circulation to come to the area and bring the medicine with it. But the way that I was taught to visualize it is that the heat is driving the coolness into the injury. So arnica would have been great for that if we'd had any, but we did not. We had yarrow, we had sage, we had mint, mentha, various other things.
So when you're talking about using the poultice on a wound,
and
then the moxa, and you just hold the moxa kind of over where the poultice is and just.
Yeah, so in this situation, you'd have a thin layer of something, like a thin piece of cheesecloth, or cheesecloth won't hold much water, but like muslin or linen or whatever. Linen works really well if you have actual linen because it conducts heat very well. Linen doesn't like insulate the way that most cloth does, which is why people wear it in the summertime. But if you have that, that's good. But just a thin piece of cloth that's been soaked in the infusion or tincture of the herb, held over, placed over a bruise or a cut or something like that, and then doing moxa over the injury site with that in between.
So if I'd had that for my son's injury the other day, then I could have used a yarrow poultice and then the moxa. Would that have helped it healing? I mean, it healed pretty fast. It was crazy.
Yeah, well, that's good. But I mean, yeah, I mean, in general, that does help things heal faster to do it that way.
I like that. I'm sure it's driving it in. I like that.
Yeah. So some of the points, some of the locations that we use for moxa. Oh, another thing about moxa is if a muscle is tight, there's 3 points that you want to do, and they're very simply one right in the middle of the muscle, then one at the further out point where the muscle attaches to the bone, and then one at the closer in towards the heart point where the muscle attaches to the bone. So, if it was somebody's bicep, you could do right in the center of the bicep, and then down here where it attaches to the elbow, and then up here where it attaches to the shoulder.
What about if it were the neck here region?
So with the neck, for instance, if you have the SCM muscle, you have the sternocleidomastoid muscle, which attaches to the mastoid process just behind the ear, and then comes down and attaches to the sternum at the other end. So you do it right in the middle of it. And this muscle, when you do moxa on it, sometimes it makes people feel a little bit dizzy because this is a muscle that helps with your sense of balance. It holds your head up straight, and so it has a lot of nerves in it that are proprioceptors that help you feel your position. So when you do moxa on it, or even if you press really hard on it, sometimes you can feel a sense of like dizziness or something like that. So it's good to have the person in a relaxed, supported position, like either laying down or leaning back on something. And then, if they have a beard, you want to get that out of the way. But so you'd start out in the center, in the belly of the muscle, kind of right in the middle of it, in the thickest part of the muscle, basically. And then come up to the further away point from the heart, which is up by the ear, behind the ear, mastoid process, which is a little bony protrusion behind the ear, and then down to where it attaches down here. With the back of the neck, that's a really long muscle. So a lot of the time, what you would want to do is somewhere in the middle of the back, and then up here at the base of the neck. And this is a point for headaches. This is a really good point for headaches and insomnia. This base of the skull on the back.
So if it were the pain there, you'd go here, down the middle of the back, and down the bottom.
Yeah, do the middle of the back first.
What about
That's what I mean.
the muscle that goes under the scapula? Would you just kind of?
What you do for that one is kind of similar, but you just have the person hold something on this side of them, like reach across and hold on to something. And so that exposes the muscle more. And then you just kind of do in the middle of it, and then up above and then down below.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are all muscles that get a lot of tension, so using this for muscle tension is really good. With just about any of them, you want to have, if possible, the muscle in an extended position rather than a flexed position while you're doing it.
So the neck will be bent down, down.
Yeah, I mean, with the neck, you mostly just want it to be relaxed. Yeah.
How would you, like, for the temporomandibular area, how would you?
So with the temporomandibular area, usually there's a muscle that runs from here to here. And so you want to do in the middle of that muscle, and then at the top and bottom of it. And then you have to have the person open their mouth, and you can feel sort of little hole that opens up in the joint, a little opening, and you want to do it on that spot.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are all things that yeah. Those are all areas where people get a lot of muscle tension, and Moxa can help with those things. With headaches, I always like to use the less smoky kind. But there are some points that are really useful, which the SCM points that I just talked about on the sides of the neck and the ones on the back of the neck can be really helpful in tension headaches. If headache has a sinus component to it, there's a little notch right in the orbit of the eye that you can feel right there. So that is a good point to do. You have to be careful that the person's eye remains closed. You might want to cover their eye with your hand. You don't want to burn somebody's eyelid or whatever. It's a very sensitive piece of skin. So it's probably the thinnest skin on somebody's body. So doing the eye on both of those points. And then there's another point for just congestion, whether it's headache related or not, that is just off to the side of the nostril on each side. So that's doing that on both sides, and then this one on both sides can really help with sinus related headaches. And with any kind of headache, whether it's sinus or tension, point right on the top of the crown of the head. That is that's useful for that.
What about carpal tunnel? Have you had, what do you typically do?
With carpal tunnel, sometimes I do use Moxa, especially if there's numbness and tingling. And I'm doing it on the ends of the fingers that have the numbness and tingling. And then at the joint, which is a point of impingement, on the wrist joint, usually I'll have them open up the wrist joint by doing that, and then do it on this side, and then do it on this side with it bent the other direction. And a lot of the time that helps. Usually I'm doing that along with some internal stuff for circulation and nerve support, or inflammation and circulation and nerve support. So points that I would do would be the ends of the fingers, distal phalanges, on any fingers that are feeling numb, losing sensation, or having paresthesias like tingling or whatever. And then along this line with the hand bent that way, and then along this line with the hand bent the other way, along the joint of the wrist. All of this takes some practice. I'm kind of loading in a bunch of information right now, but it all takes some practice. And once you get used to it, it's a really useful tool to have, a really useful technique to have.
What's the little gavel looking thing?
I'll get to that.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, so let's see. With another couple other points that I really like that I find really useful. One is right here on the elbow for nausea. And I use that a lot for nausea for a variety of different reasons. And you can do it on both hands, both arms. And sometimes if someone is very nauseous, they'll throw up as soon as you start working on that point. But, you know, that often relieves some of the nausea too. But you just don't want to be right in front of them when it happens. You know,
Give them a bowl.
Yeah. Be prepared for that situation, because sometimes it happens like that. I've had that happen at festivals and things, especially where people have been, you know, maybe overindulging in substances. The most recent time that happened, it was someone who had smoked marijuana for the first time, and they didn't know that you didn't just like smoke the whole cigarette the way that you do with tobacco or whatever. So they just, you know, they smoked an entire marijuana cigarette by themselves that a friend gave them, and you know, they were
I hate when that happens.
felt very sick, and this is like, you know, I don't know how old this person was, but not a teenager yet, you know, like 12 or something like that. You know, they were in middle school, and you know, trying something for the first time, and they didn't have the guidance they would have needed to keep from overdoing it. So
I kind of had that happen to me one time. Friends made me brownies after a surgery, and I had like a tiny piece, and like 2 hours later I didn't feel anything, so they were like, oh, just eat another piece. And I did, and I woke up and I thought my hair was on fire, and then I just proceeded to yak. It was fantastic. I was stoned for like 2 days straight. I thought like I would look this way, and then everything would just come this way slowly. It was wild.
yeah. But that point's good to know about for nausea. If you don't have Moxie, you can do it with pressure. It's usually helpful.
What's that point called? Like technically, the technical name for that point?
I don't know what the technical name for that point is. It has one, but I'm not sure what it is.
I've heard a lot of slang, but not for that.
Yeah, a question about making your own mock set, and I will get to that in a minute. I have done it. I don't usually do it now because it's labor intensive, and this costs $1. So, you know, it's not very cost effective to make your own, but I think it is a good skill to have, because if the company that sells them stops selling them, you don't want to have to be without. But yeah, I will get into making them here momentarily, and how we go about all that. So some other points that I use besides that, on the lowest rib, floating rib, well, the first floating rib actually, that's a good point for gas and constipation and yeah, just bloating and that sort of thing. So that's a point that's useful. Good one to know about. The ball of the foot, right in the curve of the ball of the foot, is one point called Boiling Springs point that is related to the kidneys. It's kidney 1 on the meridian system. That point is really good for fluid retention anywhere in the body, not just on the feet.
The central point between the two? Like
kind of like, yeah, like right here, except on your foot instead of,
okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a spot for gas, constipation, bloating. What about a spot for the like diarrhea and cramping type things?
You don't really have a spot that I particularly use for that because, I mean, yeah, the same point might help just kind of regulate things there, but Moxa is better at moving things than at slowing them down. So, you know, I'd probably use something else for that. There's a point in the center of the kneecap called the eye of the knee, and it's a really useful point for the knees and for anything kind of further down from the knees as well. So for the feet, lower legs, stuff like that, but especially for the knees, pain in the knees or crepitus, squeaky knees, stiffness in the knees, that kind of thing.
Old people knees.
Old people knees, yeah. Your knees are kind of not as young as they used to be. Doing that point can make them feel a lot better.
Like right in the middle of the kneecap.
Just right in the middle of the kneecap. You can feel it. It's a little indentation in the middle of the patella. This you probably feel. But that's another good point to use. There's a set of points in between the navel and the pubic bone, just kind of in a straight line. That's useful for irregular periods and cramping, and also for promoting fertility. And then just like with cupping, there's a point right in the angle of the rib cage and the spine on each side. And that's good for energy, energy and essence, and how your body's responding to stress, all of that. So it's kidney and adrenal glands. I mean, in the Chinese system, I think it's part of the gallbladder meridian, but it helps with functions that I would associate with the kidneys and the adrenal glands that are there.
So that's good for energy and
energy and adrenals for fatigue and that sort of thing. So that's a good, you know, small set of points that are very useful, sort of a little Moxa first aid kit worth of points. So the way that you would make this stuff, if you were going to make your own, is you want to get mugwort and dry it. And then you want to pick the leaves off of the stems. You don't want stems. They're very smoky and they don't really provide much of what you want, and they burn fast. So if you get just the leaves and you grind them up really fine, you get sort of a lint-like substance. The leaves are fuzzy, a little bit fuzzy. And when you grind them up, you get sort of the powder kind of clings to itself because it's a little bit fuzzy. And so it really reminds me of like lint. And that is essentially what Moxa is made out of, or what Moxa is, but how it's made. So you can just take that and roll it up in a piece of rice paper and use that as a Moxa stick. It'll be quite smoky, and it's if you're going to pack it tight, you probably need to wrap the paper into a tube and then glue it, and then stuff the lint down into it with a little stick, a little dowel rod or something. And that's you know, kind of a process. It takes a lot of practice to make a good tightly rolled Moxa stick. And like I said, I don't really usually do that anymore because they're very inexpensive to purchase, and, you know, decent quality and everything like that. But that's the basis of how you would make it.
If you want it to be less smoky, you can get it wet while it's in the, after you've ground it into fluffy powder, get it wet, let it stay wet for about 24 hours, and then let it dry back out. And then kind of, you have to, it'll, when it dries, it'll be kind of crusty and you have to crumble it back up and fluff it back up. And then that is going to make a less smoky version of Moxa. I have never really like baked it into the charcoal form, but when you're doing that, you need to kind of use some kind of a binder because there's no paper roll. You use some kind of a binder like tragacanth gum or something like that. And then
you use like cherry.
You could use the cherry gum, yeah. Gums are a little bit smoky too, but yeah, something like that. And then roll it into a little stick and then bake it until it's blackened. But that's even a lot more trouble than the thing that was already too much trouble. So I haven't really done that, but I have made my own raw crude Moxa sticks, and they work just fine. And it's a good thing to be able to do if you need to get something like a ship stuck in the Suez Canal and they can't get to us from China or whatever. We've all gotten to see how delicate global supply chains are in the last couple of years, and how easily things can be interrupted. So it's useful to have that skill, even if you're not going to do it right now.
It's so cheap, we'll just stockpile it.
Yeah, it's very inexpensive, and it does keep pretty well. I've used a Moxa stick that was a couple of years old before. Couldn't really tell the difference. Seemed about, it was kept dry and stuff like that, but stored well, but couldn't really tell much difference between that and what it was like when it was new. So this thing, it looks like a gavel. Is a little appliance for using with Moxa, and there are various different versions of this, but it's a warmer. And what you would do is you would put the Moxa, light the Moxa, and then put it in here, and there are some little clips in there that would hold it in place, just some bent pieces of metal. And so the lit Moxa would be in there, and held at a specific distance from the person's skin. And then you can place this directly on the skin, and it will hold the Moxa at the appropriate distance from the skin and warm this whole area. So this kind of device is for warming not just a point, but an entire area around a point. There are also little boxes, various other shapes and sizes of things like this, and it's got a screen there to catch the ashes.
And you're going to show us that, right?
Yeah, I'll show you that.
Yay.
And first I'm going to
very excited about it.
show you this. The real trick about Moxa is putting it out. Because it is made out of fluffy stuff with its own hair spaces in it and things like that, it does not like to go out. You can't really blow it out. You can't really crush it out like the way you would with a cigarette, at least not with the proper Moxa. So usually with this little black Moxa, I just have this earthenware pottery here. This is just, this is actually mud from my backyard that I fired in my fire pit, and made some made a clay thing out of, but I just grind it against that. So this one is more powdery, the charcoal one, and if you grind away all the burning part of it, it will basically go out. With the With the fluffier ones, you can't really do that. You have to either snip it off, or you have to, you can grind it out in sand. If you have a bowl of sand, you can put it in sand and twist it back and forth until it goes out, and it usually will. But you kind of want to make sure that it's out. It's real easy to, take something like this, use it for like 1 minute, and then think you've put it out, and then it continues to burn until the whole thing is ash. And then not only have you wasted a Moxa stick, but you've created a bunch of smoke in whatever environment that it's in.
That happened once, but it was a happy accident because it smelled great. But
yeah, a lot of people, if you are using the smokier Moxa, people will think that you're smoking weed. People will be like, "Oh, you smell like weed," and like, I don't know where these people are getting their weed, because to me, it doesn't really smell like weed. It smells closer to sage or something like that than it does to weed. It smells smoke, but and it's not tobacco. So I guess that's the only other alternative they can think of. But to me, it doesn't smell like weed. But everyone will comment on it and think that it does.
It smells good, whatever it smells like.
So if I get pulled over by the police, I'll be like, I swear, it's mugwort.
Yeah.
They'll be like, what the crap is mugwort?
Tell that to the judge, like. I don't know.
You get diversion either way.
So with the, if you buy these black Moxa sticks, there's some of them that have a hole. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little hole that runs the length of the Moxa stick. That is that allows air to come through it, because they don't have the fluffy air spaces inside them, and so it's hard to get the ones lit that don't have the hole. I recommend lighting these with a candle, or with, I have this thing that I was using with the cupping yesterday. A candle is really nice because you can just hold it over the candle and the candle's going to continue burning. There are even Moxa candles that kind of take some of the smoky smell out of the room. But right now I have this barbecue striker, so I'm going to use that. And it takes, with the black ones, it takes a minute for them to really get going. So even doing this with a regular cigarette lighter, it's going to get too hot while you're doing it.
So when you're putting them, like, I have a couple of Moxa sticks and I struggle to put it out, and then my kid will be like, hey, will you use that on me? And I've already used it, it's already wet, and so then I can't get it relit. And so because I can never get it out otherwise. I'm just kind of like dip it in some water. But
yeah,
I guess if you held it over fire long enough, it would eventually light.
Dry out.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. So yeah, sometimes I put a few drops of essential oil on it, and it like diffuses the oil and it puts it out, and then the oil dries up, or the oil will burn too.
Okay.
If you, the oil will burn if you put fire to it, but it won't catch on the Moxa. It'll just turn into a diffused mist, and it smells nice. All right, yeah, so there is basically just kind of blow on that until the whole top of it is red. And the thing about Moxa, especially this kind of Moxa, as you go along, it does get hotter and hotter, because instead of just having a surface like that that's gleaming, it'll get to be a very long piece of the stick that's gleaming, that's red hot. So it does get hotter as you go along. But yeah, I think, just holding it with 2 fingers and then using another finger to keep some space from the point that you're working on, so that the person doesn't twitch towards you or move towards you while gesturing or anything like that, is really important. smells pretty good. And so when I want to put that out, I just, with this, I've got this curved bowl here, and I can just kind of grind it against that until all the glowy stuff is gone. Actually blow on it to check and see if it's on. And that usually works, you know, that usually puts it out. It can be sometimes hard to make sure that it's out. Sometimes I touch it to my hand to make sure that it's out. Oh, no, it's not.
Whoops.
But yeah, so that's smokeless moxa. Moxa ashes also have some traditional medicinal uses. I don't really put them towards this use very much, but you can actually use the ash to stop bleeding on a wound or to wash out a wound. You can sprinkle the ash directly in the wound. I don't like to do that because I don't like to get any particles into wounds. But if you drain water through it, then you get a sort of alkaline substance, alkali that's it's not lye, it's like potassium hydroxide mostly, but it will kill germs and sort of you can use it to wash out wounds. The downside to using it to wash out wounds is it does sort of do a little bit of damage to the tissue that's there. So it's like a strong peroxide type of thing. I don't, like I said, I don't really use it that much, but it is a traditional use for it, and it will kill bacteria in the wounds. It will disinfect the wounds, but it will also sort of pickle the tissue that's there, or cook the tissue that's there, kind of change the proteins in the tissue that's there in a way that might make it harder or might make healing slower.
Can you poultice the ash? Like,
yeah, you can. So I don't really consider that to be a useful thing on a deep wound, especially, but if it were like on a large scrape or something, it might be more appropriate. I usually use other things. But that is a traditional use of moxa ash. I've also made soap with it. I've also cooked oil with the moxa ash water, simmered it, simmered a little bit of oil with the moxa ash water, and then let it cool, and the oil floats to the surface, but now it's soap. And then you take that off and let it dry out and everything.
fancy.
Yeah. So there's a lot you can do with it if you feel so inclined. Well over an hour, so I'm gonna finish talking about moxa, take a little break, and then do a shorter second workshop where I'm talking about some other treatments that go along with this that are basically scraping the skin, dermabrasion or gua sha, which are some traditional treatments that go along with and are similarly widely used with moxa and cupping.
I'm also like gua sha stuff, but I'm never use it. I don't really know how.
We'll get into all right, so this is the larger moxa stick, and
Are you ready for a volunteer?
sure.
Oh,
Do you have anywhere you want me to?
Yay! Yeah, my neck.
Your neck? Okay.
Both sides. And you're gonna go down.
Her whole body.
Yeah, and my knee. No. How do you pick?
Some watch.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, it smells so good.
All right, so we've got the whole surface of the Moxa stick kind of gleaming, glowing, smoking. Because this has more surface area than the smaller round stick, it's going to produce more heat. Let's see how it looks. Okay. So yeah. So I'm going to just start right up here. I'm going to do a couple of points, and just when it gets to be too warm, just let me know. Okay. Okay. So you can see this is making a big red area in each of the spaces that was worked on. It'll fade away pretty quickly. It's a good sign. It's doing what it's supposed to do. Okay. Okay.
So which is different places have different levels of sensation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Can I do the center of your back?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to do that with this warmer here.
Is that fine?
Yeah, it's fine. So this part, I'm going to put the Moxa in the gavel. The Moxa warmer.
Moxa gavel.
I'm just going to hold it here, and this will take probably a little bit longer because it's held at a little more of a distance from the skin.
And feel anything down there. Okay. Okay.
Oh.
Cool.
Nice smelling.
I don't think so.
It doesn't smell like that at all. I don't know.
Putting it in this, with this one, I'm putting it in a little jar of rice, and the grains of rice are gonna kind of knock the bits of ash off that are still burning, and then seal it so that it doesn't have oxygen to burn with, and it'll go out pretty soon.
Oh, that's
really good in here. I feel like everybody.
It's very relaxing.
Yeah, everybody got it.
A small dose of Moxibustion. Yeah.
Thank you. That was
large dose.
Okay, I'm going to take about 5 or so minutes and kind of rearrange some things, and then start back up and do the talk about scraping.